fantastic.
Very impressive.
And that was in unison.
Do we all have to write a song?
And let's see, how many of you have been practicing your interpretive skills?
Every day.
Excellent.
We did have one day we did the cycling, and you guys, they practiced a little bit of some of that. I'm not sure, it was very informal, but today is really our practice day.
Right. Well, we'll go back through a little bit of what we covered a couple weeks ago. I got some samples. We'll go outside and chat a little bit. But we are trying to get you so that you are able to do presentations with the best. What's that? Oh.
Oh, okay.
For me, nature is one of the neatest things on this planet. That's why Rodney and I started Nature Walk, because we want everyone to know how neat nature is, instead of just me and Rodney knowing it. How neat is that? That's pretty neat. Oh, wow, score! Look at this. This is an aspen. You can tell that it's an aspen tree because of the way it is.
So, unfortunately, when I burned this, the audio then repeated after that. But if you want to see more of this, you can go to YouTube and look up Nature. Nature Walk. Yes. What do you think? You guys want to be able to be like that?
Certainly enthusiastic.
I think this video came out about 2 years ago. He's gotten about 4 million hits. And there are dozens of videos that are copying him where people are doing nature walks at the high school orientation and nature walks at different nature centers around the country. Pretty funny, but unfortunately it's probably how most of the world sees us. But we want to try and get a little bit more professional than that. So we're going to go back through a few examples that are not at all first-person living interpretation. But they are 2-minute samples from some nature videos, or travel documentaries. And it was probably about 12, 13 years ago. I was headed to Central America and trying to find some travel videos just to get funned up for it. And I found 2 videos that talked about the same location. Didn't end up making it into my itinerary. But the videos both have about 2 minutes of the introduction. They're very different from each other, but they illustrate all the principles that we talked about last time around. What are you seeing, Joe? Right. Write down some notes where you see principles illustrated.
When Europe was still in the Dark Ages, they produced artists and scientists whose achievements still astound. When London was just a town of wood shacks and dirt streets, the Maya were building mighty cities of stone in the heart of the Central American rainforest. This is the greatest of them all. A thriving metropolis of 40,000 people, it reached its peak around 750 AD and covered an area the size of Manhattan. Less than a century later, it stood empty.
It's a mystery that touches everyone, because we're all existing in civilizations. And we feel the fragility of civilization when we see something like the Maya ruins, when you see how high a civilization can develop and achieve, and how dramatically it can disintegrate. It touches each of us.
Unlike so many other civilizations, the Maya did not fall to famine, invading armies, or terrible disease. Maya cities were deserted more than destroyed. The Maya who once inhabited these streets just walked away into the forest, never to return.
All right. When did it reach its peak? 1 out of 12 people remember the date. When did it start? Or when was it in relation to other things that happened in our frame of mind? When London was dirt, yeah, shacks, wooden shacks and dirt streets. How big was Tikal?
Manhattan.
Size of Manhattan. Yeah. So
Not
which
to contain any of that.
it comes at you pretty quick. They're pretty quick at the beginning. But what are the principles?
Relationships.
Relate to things that you already know instead of just throwing out dry facts. What are some other things that came up?
Provoke.
What was provocative about that?
Just the mystery behind it, as to why they want to lay.
Yeah, they didn't lay out a scientific theory that, the water sources looked like they did this and the tree rings show you this. They kind of leave it as a mystery. Sometimes the greatest way to provoke your audience or engage your audience is the fact that nobody knows. It makes them want to learn more. What else about it?
Well, the fact that it's such a great civilization in such an old period of time, how did that happen? It provokes that wondering about how the heck did they do that?
Yeah, I think our archaeologist, albeit he's from the early 80s, he really states it about as clear as possible. We all live in civilization, and if a civilization can fall, what does that mean for us? I mean, it's so succinct. So it's touching every person. That's that whole story. Touching every part of a person. It's that universal concept that really draws you in and engages you. So you can look at a different approach.
Of great Mayan cities, and every day archaeologists unearth extraordinary structures and priceless artifacts. But of the discoveries so far, the giant among Mayan cities is Tikal, where over 3,000 structures have been found in an area of 50 square miles. The Maya settled here around 400 BC. By the time of Christ, the central plaza was taking shape, and by 250 AD, it was an important ceremonial center. Tikal struggled under the yoke of Karakol for 150 years, until 700 AD, and 200 years later, this beautiful city had been, yes, you guessed it, abandoned. Why?
I've heard from my dad who studies that there was some rivers found in the area that were dried up. And it was a gradual seasonal change. They ran out of water.
They were so into sacrifices that all the beautiful people got sacrificed, all the strongest people got sacrificed. They just ruined their gene pool. They became a weak species.
I think the Mayans eventually killed themselves off in wars that they had between themselves.
The elite which elite was into inbred a lot.
But they said elite bread.
Oh, okay.
All right, so a very different approach. Does it still exemplify some of our principles of interpretation?
Well, the open-ended why, I think, is valuable. Letting people create their own answer to the mystery.
Yeah, do you think the visitors were provoked? Obviously, they were coming up with theories. Be it informed or not. What about at the beginning, when they're talking about the time scale for the creation of the city and all of that? How is it different than the first one?
Well, this one talked about Christ, so you're pointing at a religious undertone there, which is interesting.
Or at least a marker that even if you're not Christian, pretty much everybody
just knows a long time ago.
Well, there was a chronology of several bases of time, which you followed along.
Right. It was more a series of dates. Yeah. Which one was more engaging for you? Imagining when London was dirt streets and wooden shacks, or in 400 BC and then the time of the birth of Christ, and then 250 AD and then 400 AD. So throwing out those facts, those kind of the dry dates, doesn't really stick with people quite as much. How big was Tikal, according to them?
50 square miles.
50 square miles. That's a little bit harder to imagine than the size of Manhattan in the middle of the rainforest. And then you're giving the visitor sovereignty. That's one of the rules that the National Park Service uses in its interpretive programs. The visitor is sovereign. You are allowing them to make their choices and make their decisions. That's kind of that, again, that whole story, that whole principle, put it out there and let the people analyze it themselves. So, two very different approaches to the same information. Obviously, you won't be able to do animation and all those kinds of things, but the idea is when you take your biofacts and you're out there, don't just throw out how big a beaver can be. We've caught beaver in our traps up to 60 pounds. We've caught beaver in our trap bigger than most first graders. You can put it into perspective, trying to relate those facts. Another way that you might do that is, anybody have the people scared of coyotes in their neighborhood? Yeah, coyotes are the size of a German Shepherd, and they'll eat everything and go after small children. The biggest coyotes in Denver are probably 40 to 45 pounds. Most dogs that people get worried about start around 60, 65 pounds. And we catch beaver that are 30% larger than the biggest coyote. When you start to put that perspective into things, then people might, reconsider or have a little bit better image of what's happening. We're going to come back to some of the videos and some of the PowerPoint and stuff like that, but before it gets rainy, snowy, and windy, I think we will go outside and just talk a little bit about group management and presentation skills and things like that. So you might want a piece of paper to take some notes on. You might want to bundle up a little bit, but we won't be going far, just outside.
Does anybody need a clipboard or want a clipboard to be able to go on?
Wanted to go to a city council meeting with it, and that's not the size of a German Shepherd. Here's a German Shepherd. And then I have a little short-haired brindle mutt, and he's you can see every muscle on his body. He has absolutely nothing to hide it, and people look at him and go, well, he's a pretty small dog, and he's like 65 pounds, and it's still, when you look at a taxidermy mount mold for a coyote, they are scrawny. I mean, there's nothing to them. So let's see, we're going to start and head off down the trail this way.
Okay.
It's hard to believe that it's in the snow today.
I know.
Not seeing.
Got a little rubber rabbit brush here. It's got some seeds on it. Kind of a neat thing here.
Oh, you don't want my butt in the video.
That's okay.
Did you guys pick up what I was saying down here? Okay. Illustrate a very simple point as you're working with your groups, what we call the slinky effect. Anybody have any trouble with where I'm standing right now?
Like on the stuff, on the wild stuff?
Depends on your site, what your rules are. Roxborough, this would be a big no-no. South Platte Park, this is where we encourage our instructors to stand. Emily, what's going on?
I can't, I'm getting blinded by the sun.
Yeah, you're all squinting. The sun is right behind me. It's really important to keep that in mind, that you might want to turn around and let yourself be the one inconvenienced. Is that a little more comfortable for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So if you haven't figured out, we're moving into group management and how to present very clearly to a group. I do tend to step off the trail, and that is to combat what we call the slinky effect. Can anybody describe what the slinky effect is? It's been out with a big group.
Compression.
Yes, so when you start to walk, the people in the front of the group follow the leader, the people in the back start talking to each other, they fall a little bit behind. When you stop, you have to wait for the tail of the slinky to catch up before you do anything. Even at that point, you're going to be standing in the front of the group. It's going to be hard for the back of the group to see what you're talking about. So usually what I'll do is I'll ask the first person to please stop, just wait for me right here, and then I'll walk back to the midpoint of the group. So if I wanted to talk about this bush, I would have walked up another 10 or 15 feet, had them stop, and then come back so that everybody can look at it and gather around it. As I mentioned, in Roxborough, it's forbidden to go off the trail or to pick little particles of things. So you have to know about the area you're teaching. Do you guys have particular restrictions here?
We try to not go off the trail as much as possible, and the only reason for that is because one, it disturbs the soil, and we already have a lot of problems with invasives here, and the other is because the kids all want to walk off the trail. And you know, there are some, what I would say is be flexible about it. It's not like we never ever step off the trail. It's not that rigid here. Just be careful where you're stepping off to. We also have a lot of cacti around, so you have to be very careful where you step. But it's more just an awareness thing. If you're going to get your kids' attention better and it's dangerous for you to be actually, you know, on the trail, then step off the trail, vice versa. You know, just be aware.
You can step off into a bare patch or at a trail intersection. You can get a little bit of distance so the whole group can see you. Are rattlesnakes?
And rattlesnakes. We have rattlesnakes out here as well.
And I do know from hiking out here myself, as you get closer to the river, you get a little bit of, a lot of poison ivy.
Yeah, a lot.
So you kind of keep that in mind, but you can also preface it that I need to talk to the whole group, so I'm going to step off the trail, but I still want you to stay on the trail. Sunshine, we talked about having your audience facing it. What about these things you guys all have on your face?
Sunglasses?
Sunglasses, yes. Once upon a time, the rule was no guides ever wear sunglasses. Now with UV damage and all the concerns about vision, people are loosening up on that rule, but it is very critical that the first 5 minutes of your program, you don't wear the sunglasses. That you allow people to see your eyes, to see your face, to learn to read your expressions. And then once you have them on, they can kind of project that onto you. But if you just start off with the sunglasses, you're very impersonal, and it's very hard for people to connect with you or to communicate. So.
That's why politicians never wear sunglasses.
What was that?
That's why politicians never wear sunglasses.
Right, yep. Yeah, you definitely want to keep that in mind. How about projection? You guys been working on projecting your voices at all?
Not yet.
It's going to be very, very important because you think you might be loud and people in the back of your group can't hear it, so watch for what you're doing. We're a very small group here. If you add another 10 people, I can guarantee there'll be somebody behind somebody else standing like this. That's your first clue. That's your second clue. Invite them to come in, wait for the helicopter to pass over, step away from the cars or try and get a barrier in there. Road noise can really blend out voices, especially think about when we talked about your audience. If you're leading a group for seniors, the high pitches are gone from hearing, and it's really hard, a lot harder for them to pick out your voice out of a lot of background sound.
Have you ever seen any portable microphone systems? Simple?
There are some. They hang on your belt and hang around your neck, things like that. I think if you're working with groups of 30 or more, something like that might come in handy, but usually, especially in a quieter area like this, I think they're probably more of a distraction for the kids.
And for you.
Yeah. More to mess with.
Yes.
Especially if you get wind noise in the mic and those kinds of things. All right, we'll go a little bit further here. Example of some buffalo grass down here. You can tell it's a buffalo grass because it's got the little runners like a strawberry plant has, that'll start with new seeds on them. These have mostly been chewed off or broken off. So pretty cool, huh? That's pretty neat. Score. How could we improve this a little bit?
First, position yourself so everybody can see.
We saw your butt.
Ideally, what you're talking about, and especially out here, there's probably going to be lots of it. So don't go to your first example where everybody has to crowd around one. Go to a spot where there's a large extent of it. Have any of you done Native Plant Master? Jefferson County. You're in a group of about 20, 25 people. You're trying to learn a flower. Every once in a while, it's a rare flower, so you need to give your audience invitation. Please step up, maybe 3 or 4 of you can take a look and explore this one, and then if you would step aside so that the next group can come up and get a good look at it. Otherwise, make sure everybody's looking at the same example, and then you can talk about the plant all at once. What are your rules here for picking?
Well, technically we don't let the kids pick stuff to take with them, and the reason for that is because obviously if we let every kid pick everything, then we don't have anything left. Will I, like when I grabbed the thing off the tree a couple of weeks ago? Yeah, definitely. If I see something that I think is really important to share the kids and they can't see it unless I get a sample of it, I do that. I don't think that happens very often though, because generally I can find something for them to be able to look at themselves. I don't need to get something like that. If I'm, for whatever reason, in the building though, doing something at the nature center, or like for the class we had, the botany class, Christine and I went out and we cut a bunch of stuff down. You know, we'll do something like that to be able to keep samples on hand, but we try not to. Why do you guys think? Why would we try to?
Because you want everybody to enjoy it.
Yeah, basically. Yep. So it's part of the leave no trace principles that we practice. I personally was a master educator for leave no trace, so it's very much a part of my own personal philosophy, which means that I'm leaving nothing but footprints behind or taking pictures of things. I only take something when I knew like Carol would not be able to see this at night nor identify anything, so I grabbed a sample for her, and I'll do things like that.
Well, and you're teaching respect for
Exactly. And teaching respect of nature and wildlife, because a lot of people do have the mistake of thinking that anything out here is ours to own and to conquer and to be. And so I try not to teach that to the children especially, but adults as well.
Kids will give me flowers at school to pick from the playground, and I'll say, oh, that's really nice, but what happened to that flower 15 minutes from now? Looked it over and dead and everything. And so I talked to them about how it would be really nice to show me what flower that you would like. We'll look at it for days and days and days instead of for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think it sounds like it's flexible. So if you need to show something, this is not actually a stolon. That was the word I was looking for. But a stolon, you know, kind of like strawberry plants, the buffalo grass has runners that extend out from it. If you wanted to show that and what the little cluster of the new grass that's going to form at the end of the stolon looks like, you could say, yeah, I really want to show this to everybody, so I'm just going to pick one as an example, and we're going to end up leaving it here before we go. We're not going to collect anything, but here's an example you could pass around so everybody can get a close look at it. What about talking to the ground? Or, so you can see the buds on the tree up here contains all the leaves. Is that hard for you guys to hear? Yeah, it takes a little bit of practice, but you need to learn to look at it if you need to grab it, and then turn back. And again, that projection. As soon as you turn around outdoors, your voice really disappears into the background. All right, we're going to come to the front of the group. Now, they've asked me not to step on the plants here, so I'm just going to try and get up where everybody can see me here. And
unsafe.
Okay. What's wrong with how you're going to be able to listen and remember what I'm telling you? Yeah, if you're worried about the safety of your person, or you're wondering what's going to happen next, you're not listening to their message. So not just where I am, but is there a snake back there? Am I standing in a bunch of prickly pear? Is there ants crawling up my leg? Or are you guys feeling that you're in a place that's unsafe? Are you on a wetland deck where you're afraid that if you are there for more than a minute and you step back, you're going to step off the deck? Or your area where the mosquitoes are biting everybody? Just say, we're going to talk about this plant, but let's go somewhere a little bit further, and then we'll just try and remember this for a minute. So think about the areas that you stop in that sense as well. I think we'll walk around into the stone circle. You can have a seat, and I'll continue to face the sun.
Emily, this being such a mixed use.
Yes.
Anybody a little nervous about being in front of a group? Not at all. Little baby, a little.
Wow.
That's a good group.
Our groups didn't
I think you've got a bunch of professional educators here anyway.
Always and forever.
Yeah. Excellent.
If you don't, then you're not at your best.
Right. Yeah, you want to definitely be a little bit on edge so that you are prepared. So a few pointers as far as how to project your confidence. First one, knowing your material, practicing it, having that experience so that you are ready to go and you're not wondering what's going to happen next. Let's see, a couple things on here. Using eye contact. Any nervous about doing that? Find that they're not so good on it? What are some techniques you've heard how to improve eye contact? Public speaking classes, anything along those lines. Look in between people. So you're not making eye contact with each individual person, but the person next to you feels like you're probably connecting with them, or the person next to them.
Look just slightly over the top.
Check out people's hair. Yeah. One of the important things is if you do make eye contact, some people get real nervous and they'll make the same eye contact with the same person for very long periods of time, and that person will feel like they're the only one being talked to and the rest of the group will feel like nobody's talking to them, and this person must have a special message just for that individual. So, you know, kind of do the sprinkler effect where you go across the group and then work your way back. Let's see. Check your facilities and AV equipment in advance. I'm very glad I played that CD right before I got here so that I knew that the audio was looping improperly and I could only show you the first 30 seconds. Introducing yourself to the group in advance and being set up when the group gets there. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert and I am very uncomfortable in social situations where there's more than 3 or 4 people I don't know. And one of the best recommendations is get to the party early. I tried to be the first one here today. It's a recommendation that you get to establish your territory and then welcome people into your space, rather than walking into a room full of people and being, I have no idea, where's my space, where's my safe zone, how am I going to present? You kind of feel more like an intruder. You let the group get there ahead of you. How about using notes? Do you guys have a policy on that, or?
We don't have a policy. I am a huge fan of notes. When I was in grad school, one of the things I carried, and I would highly recommend this to any of you who are also people who like to jot down, even with just an outline of things you want to talk about. There are little tablets that are about this big. They're spiral bound, called Write in the Rain. So they're waterproof, and you can write on them with pencil or pen. I usually write on pencil, and then I can pull it out of my pocket, so if there's something I wanted to talk about specifically, and when I was in grad school I did that all the time because we were constantly teaching new curriculum and developing new things, and I had them for 8 hours a day, so that's a lot to remember. I personally think it's a great idea. If you're a person that doesn't, I always leave it up to your personal preference. I think the first couple times you go out it'd be really helpful, but again, you're an adult, so you have to figure it out for yourself and what works.
Okay. Yeah, obviously I'm talking off some notes today. It's a little bit more challenging when you have 3 hours of material than 20 minutes of material, but I try to minimize my notes as much as possible and minimize what's on them. Try to have just 2 or 3 words to remind me where I'm going next, or if there is a particular word that I'd like to use, like stolen, that I'm going to get. Was that a rhizome? No, what was that? As Emily was saying, spiral bound or some sort of a attachment, because what happens in the wind, or if you drop them in your nerves, they get out of order, then you're really kind of up the creek. If you are telling a presentation, you want to be practiced. You do not want to memorize unless it is a poem or a short saying. The former executive director of the National Association for Interpretation, his name's Tim Merriman, recently left to start his own business or continue his own business. He writes a lot of really neat blogs and all kinds of things like that, but he tells a story one time of being on a double-decker city tour bus, and the interpreter started off and got about 5 minutes into a script spiel. Somebody asked her a question and she got disturbed, confused, didn't know where to go, so she went back to the beginning.
Oh no.
What do you think happens to the credibility then? Yeah, plummets very, very quickly. So memorization is good if it's short, succinct, and powerful. The other thing is if you're doing something dramatic. If you're telling a story about what's going to happen to your ponds here when Chatfield gets reallocated, what will happen? Will you guys still have ponds down there?
We'll still have the ponds, yeah.
Okay. I know Kingfisher
but the
Pond
river
will be connected. but you might be telling this dramatic story about how the habitat's going to be changing. You don't want to have to imagine what's going to happen to the wildlife that lives here. You need to time it properly. I do have some more material on this, but I'm seeing shoulders rising and the wind blowing a little harder. You guys want to move back inside?
The stones are cold.
Here in terms of overcoming fear and presentation skills before we move back to some other material. Assume your audience is on your side. Is on your side. Who likes to go to a presentation and watch somebody fumble and fail? You know you're always rooting for that person to find the word to get the demonstration done excellently. Trying to get ahead by moving in next DVD here. So assume that they're on your side, and kind of the last point is accept that some fear is a good thing, as we talked about when we first started out here. Getting to know your audience a little bit, the use of names is critical. If you want to relate to your audience and have them relate to your material, if you can use their name or something about them, you know you can engage those individuals. So with a school group, I'm a little out of practice, it's been 2 or 3 years, but for a while there, I could learn 25 names in about 10 minutes and use them for 2 hours, and then the kid would come back the next week and it's like, well, here you are. If you can learn the names of 5 kids in your class, you will be able to engage most of the class because they'll kind of feel like there's that personal connection. We require that teachers have name tags on all the students, and we use those as much as possible. They don't always do it. It's really funny with the first and second graders. You use their name, they're like, how did you know my name? But if you know a little bit something about people, if you were wanting to talk a little bit about winter ecology and how important it is for wildlife to be able to survive in the nivvy, in the snow-covered environment, you might want to be talking about the importance of snowshoeing and having the fitness of being out there doing lots of snowshoeing. And there might be somebody in your audience who you know is into snowshoeing and is probably paying more attention all of a sudden. Cindy's done some snowshoeing adventure sports and things like that. So. As far as your voice projection, use natural pacing, natural patterns, breathing. Remember to breathe.
Do it.
It's important to breathe. If you know you have an uncomfortable pattern, I was wondering, if you were gonna go see some birds, or ums, really work on not saying and being quiet. Was something that I used to do a very lot, and now I just try to stop and allow some silence. It might get a little bit stilted at times, but it's a lot more comfortable for the audience. You want to pitch and vary your tone naturally, but also think about how a news announcer or radio announcer sounds. Have any of you ever been with a media person when they're going on TV, been interviewed or something along those lines? We did a raft trip with somebody from the 9 News Explore Colorado. What was this? 10 years ago. And we're at the put-in. He's this nice guy, real quiet, just kind of finding out a little bit about the park. And let's go in the raft and we'll float down and maybe you can point out some wildlife for us. Hi, this is Dave Reeman. Yeah. You have to go a little bit over enthusiastic, but if you think about what the used car dealer looks like on TV, I'd like you to come to our showroom because it's really neat. You do have to get a little bit more inflection than you would in a normal conversation without going over the top. Another annoying pattern to watch for is if your voice does the same thing every time. If any of you have ever seen the movie American Pie, so this one time at band camp, you might know that reference, but the voice that goes up at the end so that every single sentence is a question will turn your audience off pretty quickly. Another great example that I've seen in my experience was a CPR class. We had a firefighter come in and teach the class. He spoke a very boring and monotone. He was very nervous in front of groups. He talked about how you need to save somebody's life. Here's the 3 steps that you need to do. And first you're going to be doing A, and then all right, I think it's time we'll take a break. Yeah, so we were in this fire, and this lady was out of the car, and all this stuff. And, oh. So, then you gotta go be yourself. Excuse me. Use your personality. Let your passion show through. I'll have a little example of somebody who has a lot of passion, and it really helps with the program. Let's see. Pronunciation and enunciation. Look up words beforehand if you're not exactly sure how to use them. And if you know you're going to stumble over it, slow down. We're talking about anaerobic bacteria. Practice it a little bit. And let's see. Oh, one of the great examples from our certified interpretive guide class, one of our volunteers knew she got very nervous, and when she got nervous, her voice rose in pitch. So she had a compatriot out in the audience that had a little Mickey Mouse doll. And anytime her voice rose up, that person would raise the Mickey Mouse doll from the back of the room so nobody else could see it, but she kind of, that was her trigger that, my voice is going up, I need to work on bringing it back down. So if you know you have those kinds of things, come up with a strategy. They're not. No. These are kind of random things gathered from many multiple pages. A little bit on nonverbal communication. How do I feel about being here today? You want to have good posture. You want to lean into your audience a little bit. If you can move around, I'm trying to balance between a screen and a camera here, but you can move around. You can engage different parts of the audience, especially if you're working with a group of students and you know that one of them is probably not focusing on the task at hand. You need to draw a little bit of attention to the fact that you're observing that. Just walking over to them is usually enough to get them to pay attention and stand in line. Yes?
Just a little bit about communication. 50% of what we communicate is body language, and about maybe 42, 43% of what we communicate is our tone, like the voice, the volume, the speech. And 7% is actually the words that you're saying. So really when you're speaking, it's usually the body language and the tone and the volume that people are really receiving and interpreting more so than the words.
Yeah. So you need to come with your best attitude every time. And of course, 80% of statistics aren't going to be that. You do hear a lot of statistics thrown around. Was that what you communicate or how people learn?
It's just a model for neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and stuff like that.
To get a little bit more detail on that, to use that in the future. What about gestures and motions? Anybody have any nervous tics that they're aware of? I have my keys on me to keep me from playing with them in my pocket.
I don't have any. I've noticed other people's. I guess I'd say I don't think I have any. Mine are more verbal, not so much gestures, but some people use their hands a lot. A lot of times that's actually awesome. I think usually it gets people engaged to see that. But if they're always doing something with their hands, it can start to distract your audience.
And you're scaring all the wildlife away.
You're scaring all the birds as well. So I think, yeah, notice, have somebody, we always, in grad school, we always had somebody critiquing us, and we actually had to videotape ourselves a lot, which was horrifying. And you get to actually see what you do. I recommend it sometimes just for you guys to be able to see, do it on your own, have somebody do it for you sometimes just to see what you look like and how you're talking. Because I'm one of those people that found out I said a lot. I don't think I do that as much anymore, but love my stuff. Yeah, see?
Once you start thinking about it.
It's dangerous. But yeah, I don't think that the gestures are necessarily distracting, but if you're doing it all the time, yeah. Think about how you see people when they're moving their hands all the time and what, is it distracting for you, is it not? Sometimes it's really helpful. A lot of times though, we have stuff in our hands anyway, so you can't really gesture maybe as much as you
if you do have the courage to videotape yourself and watch yourself, it might pay off to watch it in fast forward or reverse as well. We have a video of one of my coworkers from years ago, and nobody really noticed necessarily a nervous tick until we were rewinding her video back in the days when it was like a tape. And for some reason, during the presentation, about every 10, 15 seconds, she kind of do something like this with her arm or her shoulder, and called it chicken wing. And once that was realized by everybody, it became kind of the source of a joke for quite a while, but it really stood out in fast forward when she was flopping her wing. I really have worked hard. I grew up in an Italian household, and gestures, pointless gestures, are a big part of my family history. So I've really tried to calm down, keep my hands quiet in here, but my nervous gesture, my nervous habit, I try and get my nervous energy out on my hands. So there's always something happening wherever my hand is. I usually end up with the right spot in the middle of it by the end of the program. But it takes a lot of practice and training to kind of tone yourself down just a little bit. At the same time, the National Park Service with your square hat and you're standing in the home of Abraham Lincoln, it really can feel uncomfortable for your audience. So gesturing is good, especially if you're trying to explain how a tree grows. You have a purpose to your gestures. Another point along the same lines is if you're trying to show things and you know you have shaky nerves. So let's try to see if we can open a bud on a tree and the whole audience can see that your hands are shaking. There are some strategies you could do.
Somebody else open it.
Ask somebody, yes, why don't you each take a bud and try and open it up and see if you can find the complete leaf inside of it. Any other ideas? Anybody crafty? You could take some fabric, felt, sew a giant bud. If you know you're going to be talking about buds all the time, Velcro that you can rip open and show what's inside a bud. It's something big that everybody can see that you don't have to worry about whether you're going to be able to thread a needle in front of 30 people. We do that with our plant dissection, our botany program. We have a volunteer for us. She has made a bug that's all Velcro together bug parts. So we can talk head, thorax, abdomen, 6 legs, wings. And then she also made us a flower that has a pistil that's like this big, and stamens that are pipe cleaners, and petals that are that big, so you can paste it all together and tear it apart without having to find these little tiny parts.
You know if you guys want to volunteer for that.
Let's see. And then if you know you have that nervous energy, rather than shifting or pacing, you can make it very purposeful. You know you've got that energy, now I'm going to speak to this side of the room. When that nervous energy is building up, I want to come back and speak to this side of the room. But make it purposeful, don't make it too distracting that way. If you are trying to avoid using notes, your props can be your notes. If you're going to be talking about your coyote, and you want to talk about how they're predators, they're camouflaged, and their dens and digging, lay out a predator skull, lay out a piece of fur, and lay out an example of their paw with claws on it, so that you know, okay, I'm done with this point, that's what I'm talking about next. It tells you your story without having to read words. Do we need to talk tattoos, body piercings, and jewelry? This looks like a pretty tame group here. Some agencies do have very big policies about what's visible and what's not. For the most part, I think local organizations are pretty open to it. But if you have a giant bar through your nose, the kids might have a problem being able to listen to what's going on.
Just carry your props on you.
There you go. Work it in.
Carl has been asking though all of our volunteers to wear the staff shirts and the you guys order are the natural shirts and they order, and so that is something that he wants to see happening now whenever we're working with students in the classroom. I'm kind of in a different position right now because my shirt is not fitting anymore. That is something that we'll be getting. Staff is actually going to be getting new shirts too, so we kind of changed over the company that we're working with. So we don't have ours yet. Actually, Carl has his own one. That'll be something we have to do as well. And that's really about it. And the shoes, just because having open-toed shoes here is not a good idea for multiple reasons. I love wearing my chacos, and it is so hard when it was 90 degrees last May to put on my hiking shoes because I really want to wear my chacos, but I just have to put my car and put them on immediately afterwards. Just because of the prickers, and because if you did need to grab a kid or you had to expecting from something, you need to be able to move and move fast without feeling like you're going to drop your shoes or get prickly pear spines in your foot. So.
And you said long pants.
Long pants are, you know, I don't mind if it's capris, and I certainly don't mind the shorts. When it was 90 degrees last year, I wore shorts. That's an easy. It's the type of shorts. Do we need to be wearing short shorts? No. Or, you know, nasty looking cutoffs that you painted your garage in? Probably not. So use your discretion. I mean, something that if you were, you know, if you were working business casual type short scenario, or like for most of us, we all have outdoor stuff. So I have a lot of stuff that is off at the knees, and it, honestly, in the morning, it's actually chilly. I always had a fleece on first thing in the morning, and then by 10, 11 o'clock, it was hot, and that fleece stayed here in the center. But yeah, just bring layers. It's better to do that. Yeah.
When do you expect the shirts in?
Oh, the shirts will be in well before your graduation, so we'll have them for them.
Because if we're doing some of the volunteer stuff now.
Yeah, and part of that is, as a mentee, we're not really concerned about it. It's more when you're actually formally with us and you're teaching that we want you guys to have those shirts on then. And we'll make sure we wouldn't be like, yeah, you have to wear one. I'm not giving you your shirt. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So, I mean, don't worry about that. We'll get them as soon as they come in.
Move to something that is in your notes now. The ones that were handed out last time, you guys have. No, it would be in your interpretation. What is interpretation? We've gone through definition of interpretation, principles of interpretation. On the next page, ways to make interpretation enjoyable. I did a lot last time on kind of if you have more creativity and freedom in developing your program or developing small pieces of your program, how to make them a little more relevant to the audience. We'll do a little bit more with that this morning in terms of very quick, simple, short things to do if you're not developing an overarching analogy for your entire program. But if we go to the next page, asking and answering interpretively, questioning strategies. I hate doing presentations in auditoriums or large places where I can't ask questions. I don't like to be the center of attention presenting all this information for an hour. I like to interact with the audience, so I want to ask questions. The best kinds of questions you can ask, there's some different examples on here actually under types of questions. Open questions. What do you see as you look at the hillside? What do you see when you look at the South River? When you look out here, what's happening? What advantages does a question like that give you?
Get a variety of answers.
A variety of answers, and it helps you gauge where your audience is at. If you have a group from downtown Denver, they might be, their question is, wow, it looks like there's a lot of trees. Who planted all of those? That's going to be a very different start to your program, and you're going to know your audience has a different background that you need to help fill in. Remember the underestimate the background, underestimate the intelligence, overestimate the background we talked about last time. As opposed to you have a group out there and you say, what do you notice? And somebody says, oh, I noticed that the mayflies are hatching in large numbers and the trout are rising to the surface. That's going to be a very different approach to the program. A focus question. What do you notice is stretching across the river at this point? Hey, I think we're going to talk about beavers because there's a beaver dam there. We're trying to get them to focus in. So we've seen the whole area, now let's focus in on the topic of our program. The interpretive questions. How do you account for the differences in the trees on the north and south slopes? Or why does a beaver build a dam? You don't have to know that your audience may not have that experience already, but you can lead them to the answer with other questions. Well, let's see, where does the beaver live? Do they live in the dam? Well, the dam is just a structure. It makes water deeper. Why would they need water deeper? Because beaver like to eat fish, right? So there's more fish in deeper water. You guys haven't had a mammal program yet.
That's not true. I was like, yeah, sort of. That's weird. They don't fish.
Yes. Beaver eat entirely plant material and almost exclusively the cambium of trees, the inner layer of the bark. But why would a beaver want deeper water? Where do they live? That's the answer from you guys. They live in a lodge. And what's important about a lodge? What's a fun fact you've learned about a lodge in your lifetime?
Less
entryway?
It has an entryway, and they want to protect it from coyotes walking in and eating the pups. So where is the entryway? Under the water. And if you want to have it under the water, what helps to have with your water?
Higher water.
Have it deeper. Exactly. That's why beavers build ponds. So we can get to that answer by asking questions. I think I've referenced Mary Ann Bonnell out at the Morrison Nature Center, actually City of Aurora. She's an interpreter. Interpreter should only answer questions with other questions. What kind of footprint is this? Ooh, do you have an animal at home that has a footprint like that? Oh yeah, I have a dog. Is this a dog? Do you think a dog would be out here all by itself? Well, maybe it's a fox. Is it a fox? How big do you think a fox is compared to? It can get a little annoying, so you don't want to do that all the time. But how much more can a person learn than if you say, oh, that's a coyote track. Okay, let's move on.
And we did, in grad school, we talked about that a lot, actually, about, we were an inquiry-based program, so what Scott is talking about, this interpretation piece and asking questions, is something that I do a lot with the students, and it's something we continue to do a lot. But we did talk about when are those moments when it is okay to just tell them the answer for what it is. And you kind of have to gauge that for yourself. I think for fun, like just as a challenge, that would be fun with colleagues. I would not do that with a kid, you know, unless it was something like, kids like sometimes too, they get very focused on having an answer and don't always think about the bigger picture, so that can be helpful. And sometimes, I mean, they just want to know the answer, and sometimes you're not going to have enough time to ask them 5 more questions and you'll get them the answer. So you guys can figure it out for yourselves, but we definitely would rather you ask them questions and ask them open-ended questions, so it's not like, does anybody know what that means? It's not a yes or no answer. It's a, so why do you think? It's usually a why or a how, not a is this, blah, blah, blah. But using the who, what, or why is usually a little bit better for that.
Our last question is summary questions. Those are really good for wrapping up your program and doing that really quick analysis of intergroup guide. So who can recap for me very quickly why the insects are hatching right now? If nobody can answer it, have you met your program objectives? Might give you a chance to recap some information or to approach it from a different way. So think of all those different ways of approaching these, asking questions of your group. The biggest weakness that I've seen in new interpreters is a very easy trap to fall into, and it's the guessing game. So guess how big the flood was in 1965 on the South Platte River?
Big.
How big do you think it was? Go ahead.
14 feet.
14? No, wrong. Who else? Come on.
10 feet?
No, it was more. Anybody else?
12 feet.
Yes. You got to it pretty quickly. But how did that make you feel when you see somebody else shot down and then asked again? And I see that come up over and over and over again. You want to ask the questions. You want to get that inquiry learning. You want to engage your audience. How much does a coyote weigh? Does anybody know?
25 pounds.
And then you do the guessing game. More, no less, no more. You're warmer, you're close. You know. If you get into that, it's very easy to get out of it. Is start giving them clues, but just be careful to try not to ask those kind of questions in the first place. Ask a question that you think people will either know the answer to, or will be able to, or maybe you've told them already, or that they'll be able to get to pretty easily. All right. Questions about questions?
Was there something, I'm just curious about this, because at the end of our programs, one of the things that, from an educational perspective, is really important, as I think Phil and Larry and those of you who've taught before, we try to do a quick evaluation of what they've actually learned that day. So during bird gaming season especially, I always have our group wrap up in this center. So we start out here in the morning, and after the classroom we meet, we talk about why are we here, what's going on, why are the birds here, why are they migrating, what is migration? We come back, and then we're asking a summative question, such as, you know, so why were the birds here? Why were the birds migrating? What did you learn? And so my question to you is, have you found that there are ways or styles of asking some of the questions? Because I always feel like I always ask the same question. And I'm personally getting bored with my questions. But it's also, and sometimes the kids just look at you like, what? And you're like, oh no. I mean, is it just the end of the day? So I have a question for you, which is, do you find, and when I worked at Islandwood, we did it at our own separate groups. groups. We never met back as like a full 200 students and asked those kinds of questions. Obviously we don't have 200 students here, we have about 30 to 40, but I personally usually like to do it on a smaller scale. I'm just curious about you. Do you tend to, when you have a bigger group, do you wrap up together, or do you have your groups individually wrap up? What has been more effective for you? And do you have a summative question that you do like to ask that you find usually informs you pretty well as to what the students have learned?
It depends on our program.
Okay.
And our time frame. Usually we're, again, racing for the bus.
So we're making
I like to do wrap-up activities or something along those lines for our ecosystem adventure program. We'll go out, we'll explore the different habitats, and we'll talk about how communities are part of a bigger ecosystem. And then at the end, we'll get the groups together, we'll lay out a giant poster cross-section of our ecosystem, and we'll have a series of pictures we cut out of the magazine. And we'll say, which community does this creature live in? And we'll lay out those things. And we go, hold up a raccoon, oh, that's in the riparian forest. And hold up a rabbit, oh, that's in the middle of a shrub habitat. That's one that we do our insects and spiders program for kindergarten and first grade. We wrap up with the head, thorax, abdomen song that we did last time. I don't like asking a question to a big group. The one time that we do use it on a regular basis, and we have an incentive for them. So we do self-guided tours in our nature center. So the chaperone's taking groups of 3 or 4 students around to all the different exhibits over the course of an hour. And we usually have about 10 minutes or so at the end to kill. Kind of unusual to have a little extra time. But we'll get the group together and we'll tell them, I have 3 questions about our nature center. If you can answer them, we'll get out the bull snake and everybody can meet the bull snake. And so that gets them a little bit more engaged rather than just asking the question and you've got that really uncomfortable silence of everybody knows the answer, but who's brave enough to say it, or who's going to be the brown, and especially with middle school, high school groups, who's going to be the brown noser that's going to answer the teacher. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And I don't often have problems necessarily with it, but I have had a couple of groups where at the end they just kind of stare at you like, what? And yet part of it is, for us, one of the things we did at Ironwood was we actually had little evaluations. We had the kids fill out at the end of the week. And we found a way to wrap that in, and part of it was a research project that was going on about our program in general. And so we all had to do it, but then we all found that we immediately quit doing it as soon as we didn't have to do it anymore. But trying to find a valued way is, I don't know, Phil, do you have anything that's worked for you if you're out with your kids, or is that something, I mean, maybe we should just be leaving this to the teacher, and I'm as much of a learner in this as you guys are, because I don't feel like there was ever necessarily a great way. Some of the games we've ended with, and that's fantastic. We don't have those here yet, except for a period curriculum I created where we do actually have a summative game that we play, and they really get it by then, but for verbatim we don't yet.
If you think about the variety of things to do for coaching, activities and questions, all the different things, and if you just reflect back through, see what feels like it's going to work with this group. You've got a bag of tricks, so you've got one that close and that helps a lot of times as you sense what your audience is capable of. It's going to be beneficial for them. So having more than one way, I think is
there something you find yourself doing?
Well, a lot of times I ask kids to we just do simple word lists.
You do what?
Simple word lists. Give me 10 words about today. And then they always get stuck at 3 or 4 or 5, and I say, I can't think of it anymore. So I say, now's when the fun begins, because we come up with ideas that are really interesting. And it encourages them to continue to think, and it never fails. They come up with some amazing things after the easy ones, and that's what I say to them. After you get the easy answers out of the way, then there's some really amazing thoughts. Not that the first thoughts aren't amazing, but I kind of build up the fact that, let's get the easy answers out of the way quickly, and then what other words do you have to describe what your day is about, what you saw, what you noticed about your attention?
Yeah.
Because they always come to that, I can't think of it, and for some kids it's needed.
And are you asking to do that individually or as a group?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, I try and get everybody to participate, but you got 10 things, you have 10 things. And I usually use 10 as a number because that stretches them beyond the easy
So
answer.
they're thinking about it individually and then bringing it to
Sharing,
the
Yeah, I was gonna say, teaching adults is totally different, but, when I'm teaching English at the university, we'll do, we're writing a particular kind of essay or something. Right now we're writing about the effects of immigration, and so we've been, as we're writing this, at the end of a class or something, I'll often talk about, okay, so what skills did we learn today in writing this particular kind of essay? Okay, and where do you think in your other classes can you use this? Where do you think in other papers can you use this? And here it would be different, but you could still do something like, okay, so what did we notice today? And when you go home and you're in your backyard, what do you think you might notice there? Or, something like that, where it's connecting them to the future so that how can you think about this again?
I like that one a lot because that is something that we, overall in general, are trying to move towards is how does this relate every day to you?
Right.
In what way are you going to see the effects of migration in your own backyard? That's really...
Yeah, or if you're
Maybe
looking at
kids,
a
you're gonna get some kids that were born, or what it was like, and then you have these different groups, and you talk about how all these different groups have migrated, and everybody's got their moving.
I know in terms of presenter karma, I'm probably the worst offender because I ask the most questions, but if I'm sitting out there, I'm the very last person to supply an answer. And one last point on asking questions. The research I've seen is it takes adults up to 11 seconds to decide to ask a question. So are there any more questions about questions? All right, that's 11 seconds. Feels a little long, doesn't it? If you don't allow that much time, there are more likely questions out there that people are not asking. And maybe it's appropriate, maybe you need to move on, maybe you can address those at the end of the program. But again, being the person out in the audience, I'm the one that's most likely to come up to the speaker after a presentation and ask a question because I don't want to do it in a group setting. So allow those opportunities.
Is that 11 seconds? Is that somebody working up the nerve or just
Forming questions, yeah, analyzing information. That's for a group of adults. Kids, they'll think about the question while they're realizing that you've called on them.
Or they raise their hand and then go, I forgot.
Yeah, there's
Forget that one.
And I think adults do a certain amount of analyzing, yeah, is this a good question? Is this going to make me look stupid? How can I phrase this question? Have we already talked about this information? Yeah, I think we need to ask this.
Well, I think the same thing applies throughout the course of this studies. If you wait and give them time to respond instead of move on to the next thing real quickly, they're used to, by the time, it's a closure kind of question or something, they're used to you waiting and giving them time to think and knowing that that's okay. Rather than, oh, you ask a question, then you move on right away, and so then when you ask, and that becomes the norm that, oh, I don't have to say anything because we're going to move on right away. So if you do that constantly throughout, you're setting that tone that it's okay to take some time to think.
Give you a chance now. We're going to transition a little bit into answering, but there's a little space in between. Emily, could you ask me a question about birds as though you were reading a program?
Yes. Can you give me, Scott, can you give me 3 different field marks that would help me to identify a bird?
Oh, I saw this bird in my backyard, and it had like this yellow crest that went all the way up the back. And anybody ever had that happen with kids? What are some ways that you can work with that question?
Well, maybe describe better. Or describe the bird, and then say, well, what bird do you think that might be? Or maybe we look it up in a book to try to find out what kind of bird that is.
Yeah, I'll take it a little bit more extreme. You tell me something about a bird. You saw field marks in a bird. I saw this bird in my mom's yard. My mom and my dad live in 2 different places because they're not together anymore. My dad kind of lives up in the mountains, and I live in the house with my mom right now. And you can imagine the kids going on and on because they're wanting to share their stories. So how do you deal with that? Because it happens probably every school group, at least 3rd grade and under.
let's focus on the bird that you saw on your mom's chart. Let's come back to those three things. Let's come back to the question.
Yeah, I usually let one child get most of the way through a story, find out if I can interject, draw them back. Say, now, a question is when you need information from me. A story is when you're telling me something. Let's save the stories when we're walking on the trail so we can get out there sooner. Because I know everybody has an exciting story that they want to share. There's a couple different ways you can handle it, but kind of thinking through that process, especially kindergarten, first grade, raising your hand usually means sharing something rather than asking something. So being prepared to deal with that.
I've seen people preface their question or their presentation with, you know, you have a question, somebody raises their hand, is that going to be a question, or is that a story? Especially with the little kids, they know, so they state beforehand, is it a question that you have, or is it a story? And getting the kids to see the difference, and then, okay, ask your question.
And it's really helpful. Sometimes, especially when you're rushed for time, you don't always have time to tell most of the story. And so that's something that I use. Like, oh, this sounds like a fantastic story. We can tell me that later. Do we have to answer to the question? And that's
Especially if you are pressed for time, you have permission as the program leader to interrupt somebody. Say, oh, you know what? I really want to hear that story, but I need to stop you there because it's a story and we need to move on or something like that. But just make sure you give that sense of value, appreciation for their participation. So now you've asked a question, why do beavers need a deeper pond? The response comes because they hunt fish and they want to have more fish in the pond. How do you respond? We're moving on to the next page, response strategies. So that would be kind of the accepting response, the first one there. Okay, I understand where you're coming from. Paraphrasing it, so we've got the passive acceptance. Okay, that's one possibility. Let's see if we can get some other ideas. The active acceptance, so I hear you saying that beavers eat fish. Is that what do I understand that correctly? So you can kind of take it around and make sure that you're not misinterpreting something. Okay, so yes, they really did need that. Now what? I can understand why you'd be confused about that, because beavers look a lot like otters. Otters love fish, and they would love to hunt fish in a beaver pond. Think about those beavers' teeth. So you're able to move them along, but you're giving them that accepting response that, that is a stupid response to that. How could you even think that?
No.
Yes, please don't do that. They will never respond to another one of your questions. They will. It definitely can impact
their whole developmental cycle.
Yes.
Started for life. Yeah, that's why your mom and dad live separately.
I was going to say that's where educators and families come from instead of rangers. Using silence, the next strategy there. Just allow the answer to sit out there. Somebody in the audience might respond to it. The clarifying, kind of like the emphatic, empathetic acceptance, you're going to ask for a little more information on it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Where did you hear that information? Is there a reference that you're using? No, your Uncle Chet is wrong. And then facilitating data. One of the purposes, let's see. Involving the visitor to find their own answer. Do any of these flowers smell nice? Let's go try it. Go ahead and answer their question with an experience. Let them do it.
And that's actually one that kids actually do think a lot with the beavers, that they do eat fish. And I actually thought that until I got here, and then the Wikipedia beavers flies down to the river, and I was like, oh no, they don't eat fish. But if you're actually down there and you guys are talking about it, the best thing is to actually do that. There's the lodge right there. What is the lodge covered in? What do you notice about all those branches that are on that lodge and those dams? Is there something missing? If they don't get it, usually they'll figure it out. If you just point them towards it, they'll actually see it, and then you can tell them, well, why is the bark missing? Why is that off the tree? What are they doing with it? And they can answer their own question just by some simple observation.
They do sawdust.
They do.
That's a really good question.
Have you ever seen beaver poop?
They do, yes. It is a ball of sawdust.
Oh, that's big.
Well, no, sorry, not
Okay.
that.
The size of Manhattan.
It's about the size of a shooter myrtle. I mean, it's inch and a half in diameter. They're almost always in the water. So you need to find like a still part of the river, and you'll find these little balls of sawdust.
Okay. We'd like to.
We have a little bridge that goes across a wetland. We see them out there, or sometimes when we're wading in the river. We'll
Do
find
you
them.
have any?
Yeah. We have some in our. When you return your stuff next week, nice to see it.
Never seen beaver.
That was.
Well, somebody told me that roly-poly bugs poop dirt.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they do.
That's what Emily
Decomposers, they call this
We're actually, I think, coming up on break time.
Yes.
Lead into the break though. Maybe I will continue for about 6 or 7 minutes. You guys have that?
Yep.
Change my disc here. Go to a shorter, more creative way. So again, we're kind of focusing in on what you might do with school programs and how to get the information that you're getting across, the objectives for your program a little bit more interpretive, a little bit more entertaining. But I will show you a little bit more of the extreme end of the spectrum. But as you watch, this is Doug Elliott. He's a professional interpreter who goes around and does performances. And he does kind of character interpretation. His character is himself. He's not playing a historic character, he's playing himself.
If you ever want to get into tuning with my friends,
Yes.
okay, he's our entomologist.
Okay.
He did the Phineas Victorian exploration for bugs this summer.
Oh, nice.
When it was 85 degrees outside in his warm velvet coat. He did a fantastic job. I would highly recommend if you want to see actually not being yourself. I mean, it is him, but it's not him all at the same time. It's pretty impressive. He's pretty proud of himself. He worked hard on this. Have you ever seen him do it?
Not that particular one. I've seen him do insect sex kinds of
Yes,
things.
he does do some other ones, but this is one where he actually dresses up as Victorian era Phineas and Phineas
I'm
Nicholson.
thinking that this guy kind of has a look and a personality, like if I remember
Yeah.
properly.
I don't know this guy.
So again, watch for the interpretive principles in what he's doing.
Oh, those crows. You know, those rowdy blackbirds. You know, a lot of people don't like crows, ravens, or blackbirds. And, you know, they're opportunistic omnivores. You know, like a lot of us around here. You know, one day you'll see those crows, and they'll be out in some farmer's field, and they'll be pecking their way through the husks, and they'll be twisting the kernels off of that dry field corn in the fall of the year, and just working away on that. The next day you'll see those crows, they'll be out in some meadow, and they'll be pecking in the ground trying to dig up sodworms and chasing grasshoppers and other insect pests. And the next day you'll see those crows, they'll be doing cleanup work alongside the highway or pecking at a fresh roadkill, you know. You know, but a lot of people don't like crows, but a lot of us kind of admire crows. Have you ever watched crows in a windstorm? You know, the wind starts roaring in, and those other birds will be kind of hunkered down in the thickets, they're looking for shelter, and those crows will be out there flopping around, just dancing and twirling like a bunch of rowdy surfer boys, you know, just twirling. Every blustery gust they meet with a dance and twirl and a pirouette. Oh, would it be that we could meet life's challenges with such agility and such grace? Oh, I tell you ever look at those sooty black feathers? You know, they're so black and they're so sooty that when the light hits them right, they're actually iridescent and it reflects back every color of the rainbow. And oh, those crows are smart too. I mean, they're smart, you know. I talked to you about how those crows, they can recognize those little sprouts of corn when they first come up out of the ground. Looks like little sprigs of grass. And those little crows, they'll pick them up and they'll twist that kernel off and go from one plant to the next. And they're you know, one time I went out to my field and I saw the crows fly out of my corn patch. And we just planted a few weeks before. And I went out there and I looked. And I was amazed. I could see where they had been. You could see their footprints all over their tracks. You ever seen crow tracks? You know, they kind of drag that hind claw. They're cool. You know, they kind of stagger. You know, and you can see them dragging around there, just picking up those. And I could see the tops of those little sprouts of corn where they twisted the kernel off. And I could see them. I picked one up. I looked at it. It's all fleshy. I tasted it. You know what? It tasted sweet as sugar. And I learned something that morning. You know, when a seed sprouts, that's when its nutrients peak. That's when all the starches turn into sugars, and all those sugars come up into that sprout. You know, you go to the health food store, you buy alfalfa sprouts. You know, the Asians, they've been sprouting beans and things like that for centuries. You know, and back in some of the hills and hollers in the Appalachian Mountains, you know, there's been a lot of corn been sprouted there. You know, where farmers are trying to make a value-added product of their corn crop. You know, they sprout and get sugar, ferment it, and then make some corn liquor. And you know, people have been sprouting corn for centuries and known about it for centuries, but crows have known about it for even longer. You almost never see a roadkill crow. You notice that? And you know why? Because, you know, a lot of times they're alongside the road, feeding on some of that fresh meat they find along the road. But there's a flock of crows there working on some piece of meat. There's always one crow up in the tree. That's the guard crow, and that crow watches out. And whenever it sees a car coming, it goes, car, car, car. And you know, crows have a big vocabulary. They sing out danger. They sing out warning. They sing out the love between the brothers and the sisters. You ever heard in the spring of the year when the mom was feeding them, carrying them little baby crows? And you know, if you speak crow, you can sing out your highest praises. You can sing out your greatest joys. You can sing out your worst fears and furies. If you speak crow, you know, you can tell anyone exactly what you think about them. And if you speak crow, you'll be able to say what you want and you'll feel a whole lot better. Now, I'm get a crow in each and every one of you, and I bet we can turn this into the biggest flock of crows this place has ever seen. So I'm going to look at a crow. Let's hear you. This is your chance to speak it out. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you're only waiting for someone to arrive. Blackbird, fly. Blackbird, fly.
All right. It goes on to actually bring in some of the things he just taught about into lyrics of the song, and then they get into some hillbilly jokes and things like that. What are some observations that you have on this?
His gestures and his tone of voice, and he was animated and passionate and funny. It was great.
Has anybody been to a lecture on crows or the Corbett family, or any, think of an ornithology class, or the last time somebody presented even about not a crow, but another species of bird? Did he provide facts for you?
Yes, he did.
All kinds of facts, and learn more about corn and sprouting and how plants metabolize their carbohydrates. Lots of stuff packed in there, but did you feel like you were learning?
No.
No, it was almost entirely an entertaining evening. Engaging the audience, getting them to caw and crow. You know, we did a presentation on corvids and how they're a very intelligent species. Now, can I have everybody crow like a raven for me? You might have one or two volunteers, but he got the whole audience engaged very quickly. Yes.
He used a variety of techniques too. He used music, he used song, he used humor, animation, audience participation.
and it happens so quick. It's almost a little too quick. He doesn't quite finish his sentences, and he stumbles. I mean, he doesn't stumble over himself, but it comes so fast. It's obviously rehearsed.
It's like a monologue.
Yeah, but that was 6 minutes. And I mean, that's something that I'm not saying you should go out there and put on a hat. You know, it's going to be received differently for your groups. But if you know you have 5 minutes on great blue herons while you're at the edge of the wetland, rather than just giving a few dry facts about blue herons, what could you do with it? With that, I will let you guys take about 10. Well, yeah, about 10 till. We're going to go. We're going to take a little, again, back to the smaller end of things here. So just some, again, quick things to make interpretation relevant and personal for your audience. Interpretation is relevant, meaning it's personal, it connects with something the person cares about. So we've talked about that a little bit here. And it's also meaningful, it connects to something that the person has context with. Thank you. So it's something that they know about. So one of the ways you can do that is universals. We saw a really good example of universals, the very first video I showed, or second video I showed this morning, not the first one. This is an aspen tree because of the way it is. But the Mayans, what's the universal concept that everybody can relate to? Civilization. Civilization, right. What are some other universal concepts you can address?
Family.
Food, survival.
Habitat, shelter.
Habitat, I would say it's a universal need, but I don't know it's something that every human can universally connect with unless you get it explained and described. But the kind of the key words that trigger in somebody's mind instantly, I know something about that. So family, food, survival.
Birth, childhood, adolescent, adulthood, death.
Death. Yes.
Somebody said shelter.
Shelter.
Mating, sex.
Yeah. Loss or winnings, gaining something. What about God?
No.
You don't think everybody has an opinion one way or another? I think it's kind of something that every human thinks about or struggles with, whether it is, this is my belief, this is your belief, our beliefs don't cross. That it's a universal concept that if you bring up the word God in a room from anybody anywhere in the world, will they be able to have some sort of a commentary on it? I would think so. Love. Shadowing. There's some studies from psychology that if I were to be giving out a whole bunch of facts and I were to then say the word Phil and then a bunch of other facts, which facts do you think Phil is likely to remember? The ones that come right after his name. So when you're using a presentation, if you know somebody's drifting off or if you know their name, you want to engage them, just throwing out their name instantly triggers your brain. Just, oh, I have to listen. Okay, I don't need to listen. Same as the selective attention. People pay attention to what they're interested in. How many of you have children? And you can tell mommy from your child or daddy from your child from every other voice out on a playground. That's the selective attention. If you are very interested in coyotes, the program could be going along, wetlands, mud, birds, coyotes. Oh, maybe I'll listen to that. So trying to understand what people are going to tune into. So you can help people through this process very quickly. These are like one-sentence kinds of ways to engage your audience and make your information more engaging. Self-referencing. Think of the last time that you. I'll give you a few more of these and then we'll practice a little. have you ever, how many of you have, or what do you have in your home that? So let's see. Put a little box of fun over here. What have we messed with today? You're doing a botany program. See if you can come up with a way to finish each one of these sentences that would help somebody self-reference this object. So as you look at that pine cone, think of the last time how could you finish that sentence and help somebody connect to that pine cone just a little?
What's flowering in you? And how can you disperse that in the world? There you go. At first, the flowers, yeah. What's clinging to you from your life journey? That was going here. I use the word God, but I definitely have my own spiritual. Yeah, totally.
Let's get a few ideas out here. How many of you have ever fill in the blank? What was it? Eating the pine cone. Eating the pine cone? Anybody ever tried it? Bitter. Well, not the pine cone itself, but you can imagine the tars and things in there. That'd be a good way to approach. That's why some birds specialize in eating pine cone seeds and some don't. Have you ever
taken a pine cone apart? Have you ever seen a squirrel take a pine cone apart? Have you ever seen a bunch of pine cones under a tree? Wondered why they were there.
We'll kind of get into some other things that might be similar, but how many of you have seen squirrel midden with pine cone things? Anybody ever reminded of apple cores? How many of you ever eaten an apple? It's a great way to all of a sudden get kids to kind of see how the squirrels are approaching that. What do you have in your home that
is layered like a pine cone?
layered?
That radiates out from the central core.
So it's got a pattern to it. Think of the last time you
Opened up and dispersed something valuable out into the world.
Wow. Excellent. So again, just very simple statements, but you can instantly engage your audience because now they're thinking back through their life history, trying to connect with this little pine cone. So what? Okay. Another way you can engage your audience is label them. If you have no idea what a wetland is, this program is for you. How many people are gonna, start to pay attention a little bit? The negative labels. If you're one who hates wolves, whether that's a label that applies to you, and you go, yeah, I'm one who hates wolves, I want to hear about it, or you're not. Well, I don't hate wolves, so I'm going to listen up because I'm going to disagree with you about something. So you're kind of putting people into a situation that kind of forces them to engage a little bit. And then the neutral label, if you've ever been on a long journey, you kind of assume everybody has, but now they're working through their memory, trying to connect it to what you're talking about. Meaningful, trying to make interpretation meaningful, is bridging it to the things that people are familiar with. We're bridging the familiar to the unfamiliar. We talked a little bit about this last time, but a metaphor. What's the difference between a metaphor and a simile? Your teachers out there? Okay, like or as is in the simile, right? The metaphor, you just do what? State it like it's fact and assume your audience is smart enough to figure out that Arctic seas are not actually refrigerators. Can you come up with a metaphor for your pine cone?
Pine cone is like an onion with layers.
Pine cones are the incubators for the future forests.
For a burrito for squirrels.
Very nice.
Squirrel burrito.
Taking a metaphor a little bit more extensive would be your analogy. And so maybe you would take the metaphor of a pine cone is your burrito, and you would turn it into an analogy. What would you need to do to make it the analogy? Take it a little further. So you've got your tortilla on the outside, right? And then every good burrito is going to have what in it? Some sort of protein. So yeah, the protein's wrapped down into the middle there. Of course, it's all rolled up and round, so it's easier to get your mouth around. I don't know how you do it.
And the red hot ants that are walking on it is the salsa.
So do you need to spend an hour at home developing a theme and all these creative ways to do it? Or is this something you could do in 5 minutes for one piece of the program where you're like, it just kind of falls a little flat. I wonder if I could do something different with the cattail. Comparison. Humpback's tail is wider than 4 men standing side by side with their arms spread apart, or 4 women who are 5'8" and taller. That's pretty dramatic, right? You can even go a step further. Could I have the 4 of you go ahead and stand up at the back of the room, please? And let's see. Sorry, your name tags.
Wow. That's cute. Okay, now move my
Keep
wheel.
going. There you go. So now.
Wait.
Huge tail.
So we've gone from comparison to what? Demonstration. You're getting the audience up. So they have sort of an engaged, fun, oh, I got the blood going, and when you do something physical, the extra flow of blood can kind of help seal it into memory. But for those of you sitting down here, the first time my co-teacher and I did this and we looked at that and it's like, oh, that's pretty good, move on to the next slide. When we actually got 4 students up, it's like,
yeah, that's big.
If the tail's that big.
That's just the tail.
Yeah. So that's demonstration.
I had thought about that just the other day, and it occurred to me that whenever kids are showing something, they're the performers, they don't get to see themselves. So if you have 4 people that they can look at, or looking at each other, and everybody gets to see the same thing.
Very nice.
The 4 of us standing up here. If I'm on the end, I kind of go that way, but I don't see the same perspective as what I.
Do you want that up here? But again, your wetland program, are you talking about the black-crowned night heron? Get the kids to stand on 1 foot and see if they can stay extra still for as long as they are.
Little yoga.
We'll play the silence game. Who can stand quiet and still?
For a whole hour.
Similes, we kind of hit on those already, but using like or as. There's a program from Project Learning Tree that we use with our wetland program. I don't know if it's wrapped into yours or not, but it's the wetland metaphors. They call it wetland metaphors, but you have the kids reach into a bag and they pull out a cradle at the end. This is one of those wrap-up activities. A wetland, the kids then have to go. A wetland is like a cradle because it provides protection for young babies. A wetland is like a pillow because it's a resting place for wildlife on migration. And so that's a very quick wrap-up activity. They call it the metaphor, but are you guys familiar with Project Learning Tree? A couple of heads. It's put out by a national organization, and they are nature activities, and everything from very short lessons to very long, full classroom or week-long activities. But I also noticed the Keepers of the Animals. This is the Keeper series we use quite a bit in our nature center. There's a lot of those kind of quick activities in here as well. That one takes Native American stories, so you can tell a story, then follow it up with an activity and teach about how that
This is a fun book too. I got this from the library.
Yeah.
They have a whole series of these.
Discovery
They have one on
Nature.
wetlands as well.
Communication skills, we covered a lot this morning, asking and answering, all of that. The guided tours, this is what I was teaching outside, so you've got a little bit of notes on it, but just remember that they're like a program, except they move from place to place. So when you're developing a set program, think of them as a slideshow. Think of your main point, think of your transition between points. I just did a very quick impromptu guided tour, so I didn't really have my stops planned out. But you probably noticed it felt a little disjointed. Here we were talking about rabbit brush, then all of a sudden we're talking about buffalo grass. How can I transition between those two stops?
Can you explain how the different animals use different plants?
Think of your writing classes. What are transitions that you use when you write essays? You can foreshadow, you can ask a question, you can set up a mystery. So we're kind of on the guided tours on page 3. Transitions are really important. So if I'm talking about the rabbit brush, I'm going to foreshadow and give you a reason to walk. Next, we're going to try and find the lowest growing plant in all of Chatfield. And you start to walk. And now where do you think they're looking?
Down
They
there.
want to be the ones to find it. Roxborough does this a lot on their geology walks. So we see this layer. Next, we're going to hike until we find a rock that looks like tapioca. And then you can move on. Any other ideas for how you can, so it's not just, okay, let's go. Okay, now we're here. Okay, now the next stop. But today I'm going to teach you about 4 things about wetlands. The first thing we're going to learn is about the mud and what creatures involved in the mud. My second point will be about cattails. Now we're talking about cattails. It's the same as when you're writing a theme paper. Here's what I want to tell you, and I'll tell you these things. And then you have to get from each topic to the next and make it feel smooth. So think about, I need to get them from this classroom facility down to the edge of the pond. What am I going to do along the way? Think that out ahead of time. Those are probably the parts that are not in the outline. And you want to keep them engaged. You don't want them talking about their PlayStation or their Nintendo experience the night before as they're walking down. You want to keep them engaged.
What joysticks might you find in nature?
What was it?
What joysticks might you find in nature?
How do animals entertain themselves? And your guided hikes should be pleasurable, they should be relevant, and they should be organized. We talked about the spontaneity walk that our volunteers had last time. So you need to have that organization, you need to help lead people from, here's the premise that I'm going to teach you at the beginning, here's all the points that support it, and here's our conclusion. You don't just want to throw a bunch of facts at them, because when they get on the bus, what are they going to remember? A couple of facts, maybe. It's a neat place, but they're not going to have that whole story, that whole message. Christine and Emily had asked me to do a few things of good and bad examples. We'll share this. The National Park Service testing, and I apologize, not only are these hard to read, but my slides have transitions, and so it doesn't show you the points here. But we'll go through them very quickly, and you can maybe make a few notes on it. The National Park Service training talks about what interpretation is not. So we gave you the definition last time of what interpretation is. Interpret data. You honestly present the facts and nothing but the facts. And you believe the audience is interested in information only. We'll have a dialogue as long as you stick to the facts. And you may have your own perspective as long as it's factual. What piece of the definition of interpretation are we missing here? Remember the emotional connection? Yeah, so there's no emotional connection here. So here's one from a project I did in China. Everybody read the words on there? Or are you going to make me read it?
It's kind of hard to read it because it's so many words. Yeah.
A lot of words. Do the words mean anything to you?
No. It's right, left, upper, lower.
Okay, and then this is, we've got some historic references here. The Qianlian was made in the Qing Emperor Huinglong's reign after the fashion of the Wang Mang period of the Han Dynasty. The inscription on it was written by Emperor Qinglong. So this is in Beijing, the Forbidden City. It's this incredible palace that has been there for many, many, many centuries. You go in because it's designed for millions of people to go through, so they don't have a lot of signs, they don't have a lot of places for people to stop. And there's this giant grain measure, like, you hang the baskets on it and it measures things. And that's what it tells you. What do you go home with?
Pictures.
Something happened, yeah. This doesn't connect with you, there's no way to relate to it. It's just a bunch of facts. It doesn't tell you why you would measure your grain. It doesn't tell you why it would be important in trade or in paying your taxes to the government. Would you be killed because your grain didn't measure up? There's no message to it other than entirely data. Then we have interpropaganda, and this is the environmental movement's biggest problem, I think. Ignoring multiple points of view, skewing facts to a foregone conclusion, oversimplifying the facts. The environment is warming, and therefore life is over. Communicates in one direction by discouraging dialogue. This is the message I want you to have, and you must have it. Tempts the audience to only see one perspective. Now this one I'll read because I know it is dark. The Great Wall and the frequent expeditions and combats could not sever the concord and interchange among our fraternal nationalities. In the long years of Chinese history, the Great Wall was always a strong link of economy and culture among the nationalities of northern China, and a historical witness that China was always a unitary multinational country, which I always like to point out is in a different font. Does anybody know why the Great Wall was built?
Defense against the northern...
Yeah, it was in the middle of China, in the middle of our fraternal nationalities, to keep them from killing each other. It wasn't there to be a strong link of economy and culture. It was to separate that economy and culture. So this was created after the Cultural Revolution, when all China had to have the same opinion about everything, and the Great Wall is their gift to the world, and so it's a good thing. At the time, it was very divisive. It was incredibly destructive to the cultures. So this is where the government came in and said, here's the message that this museum needs to teach. Is this valid and honest and all of that? Interpretainment, stereotypes, different points of view for effect, arranges the facts around the punchline, does not believe the audience is interested in the resource. They're just interested in the ultimate message. You don't really care what the audience thinks, only how it's going to react to the entertainment. And only shallow dialogue that supports this show is included. A quick example, hopefully everybody can relate to. You know what's happening in this scene?
good witch and the bad witch.
Right. So one story tells you that the good witch is defending everybody from the bad witch, right? Anybody familiar with this story?
Yes.
What's the happening in this scene?
Well, the bad witch is really actually the good witch.
Yes, the green witch is actually trying to protect people and stand up for them, and the good witch is very evil, self-centered personality. So we could put that into our message here. So you can have the exact same facts on wolves in two different presentations, but are either one of these entirely honest? No. You can imagine those presentations being just for entertainment purposes or propaganda purposes. They're not true interpretation. And interpretation presents multiple points of view, but there is a correct answer. And this is a variation on the word education, I think. Facts support the learning objectives. You can retain information, or retention of information is most important. Can you parrot this back to me on the test in 2 hours? So your belief is that the audience needs to learn, and the dialogue is guided to what they should know. And it kind of assumes once the audience knows enough, they will agree. There's the best example I could find at this point, a little environmental, what are the problems worksheet. So there's really only one way to look at this. Let's see, anybody spot an environmental problem or solution?
Overpopulation.
Overpopulation, okay, it's, horrible in here. Let's see. Yeah, we got pollution. Factories are bad.
Burning coal, gasoline,
So
not a single tree.
It doesn't necessarily offer a lot of opportunity to discuss, well, where is the role of industry? Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? Can it be done with restrictions? Maybe another education end of thing. What's trash versus recycle? And, some of these things are very simple tools that you might use as part of a program, but are you being honest with the interpretation, the emotional connection, and telling the whole story? So true interpretation presents multiple points of view, honestly presents information that leads the audience to personal revelation, is not afraid of complexity, treats the audience as intelligent people, and encourages dialogue. That's what your goal is if you're going to be doing interpretation. So, would you guys like another video example?
Yeah, sure.
We have currently a sample from one of our interpretive guide classes last year. And Stu's actually works at Chatfield's. Anybody know Stu Hayes, one of the part-time rangers for them, seasonal rangers? When he came into the class, he wanted to do a presentation on invasive species. One of his jobs is to work at the invasive species station where they check your boat for the aquatic invaders. Yeah.
Zebra mussels.
And so he wanted to tell people they're bad. Here's the reasons that they're bad, and we need to keep them out of the park. And how many of you have seen a presentation of some sort along those lines? That is very factual. Here's the facts. Here's the problems. So we worked with him to develop his program and come up with an interpretive program that demonstrates some of the principles that we've talked about.
We just talked about this the other night, so I'm excited to see what this is. About invasives and about how there are some benefits and disadvantages to them, and that it isn't so clear and so black and white.
With all the
You guys are average users of Chatfield State Park. So you're bikers or hikers or boaters or fishermen. Just people using the natural resource of the park. We're in the nature center, and I'll start from there. So, action. All right, welcome today, folks. Just to start off with, I want to point out a few things. We do have some snacks in the back if you want to get some water, coffee, or something to munch on. The presentation is only going to be about 10 minutes, but if you have to use the bathroom, bathrooms are off to the left, so feel free to use those if you need them. To start off with, I am Stu Hayes. I am a seasonal park ranger at Chatfield State Park. And today we're going to be talking about invasives, tiny packages, big problems. Now, one of my jobs as a park ranger at Chatfield is to help stop the spread of invasive species. Now, who here among you can tell me what an invasive species is? Who, of course?
It's a non-native species. Plant, animal, insect that is not here originally.
Exactly. So that's pretty much what an invasive is. It's a species of plant or animal that's been introduced to a new area where it doesn't belong. And that's what we're going to kind of go into a little bit today. So to start off with, I want to run you guys through some imagination scenarios. And what I'd like everybody to do is to close your eyes. Okay? Close your eyes. And I want you to picture a body of water that you used to visit sometime in the past, be it as a child or sometime in your youth. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring you back to this body of water today. However, when you come to this body of water, you notice something different. You notice something that's not quite right. And what you see is this. Go ahead and open your eyes. What you see is all these little things covering everything. They're covering the rocks. They're covering some of the trees by the shoreline. They're covering dock piers. They're on the shoreline. In fact, when you're walking down the shoreline, you kind of feel it crunching underneath your feet. Also, if you happen to be careful, you can feel them real sharp. They're pointy. And in fact, they're kind of cutting up your feet. They're real nasty. Well, on further inspection, you'll bend over and you'll pick up some of these things. And what you notice that these things are about the size of empty pistachio shells. They're really hard. Well, what you're holding in your hand are zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are small aquatic animals that were accidentally introduced into the Great Lakes back into the 1980s, and they have been making their spread west and south ever since. And what they do is they clog up everything. They get into all the infrastructure. They're real tiny, but they start covering, again, the rocks, trees, boat docks. They encrust the bottom of boats that have been in the water for too long. They get up into the motors. They get into dam infrastructure. They cause untold damage, millions of dollars of damage. But again, something very small affecting a very large picture. Now again, we're going to go into another scenario. So I want everybody to close your eyes once again. This time, you're going to imagine a field from your past. Maybe a field that you used to hike through. Maybe a field you used to ride your mountain bike through. Perhaps a field that you used to hunt pheasant in, if you were hunting pheasant. And we're going to bring you back to that field today. Once again, there's something wrong. There's something different. You begin to notice that the plants, the animals that you used to see in this field are no longer there. Where did they go? Well, as you enter this field, you see this. Go ahead and open your eyes again. You notice all these tall plants, plants you've never seen before, just kind of taking over the entire field. These plants in particular are mullen. They're really tall and very long seed heads. You see them around here in Colorado quite a bit. They're not native here to Colorado. They are an invasive plant. And the seeds on this plant are very tiny. If you look at this picture here, it might be a little hard to see. This is a penny, Canadian penny. It's the same size as a regular penny. And you see these little seeds on here. You know, they kind of look like cracked pepper or maybe grains of sand. Really tiny. Now, if you can imagine you're walking through this field and maybe you get some of these seeds in your clothes or inside your shoes. And then at the end of the day, you might brush those off or empty those seeds out somewhere else. And those seeds have now spread to a new location. You have other invasive weeds that do the same. Again, this might be a little hard to see, but we have some common burdock seeds here. We have some bold thistle. You can see how big this is. This is me right here. That's not like bold thistle. But again, these are certain seeds that can get spread around by attaching clothing. Take the burdock seed, for instance. Now, they're about the size of a marble, but in essence, they're kind of like Velcro. Not unlike this Velcro dart. It's a plastic ball with some Velcro strips on it that you can throw in a Velcro board. They're very much like that. So when you're walking through this field and you brush up against those plants, is stitch your close. Also, if you're walking a pet through a field, granted, you guys probably are not going to have a baby silverback gorilla out in the field with you, but for demonstration purposes, this will suffice. So if you got a pet out in the field, you're going to stick to their fur. As such. As such. And then at the end of the day, you know, you might notice these things stick them to your clothing, to your pet, and you're going to start picking them off and maybe chuck them to the side, maybe somewhere else on the trail, maybe at your home in your yard. And in fact, what you've just done is you've taken those seeds and transplanted them somewhere else where they're going to grow and kind of take over. Once again, something really small coming into an area and taking over a much larger picture. All right, for our final scenario, once again, everybody close your eyes. This time, I want you to picture a forest. A forest from your past. Perhaps somewhere you used to hike as a kid. Again, maybe riding your mountain bike through, maybe hunting deer. And once again, we're going to bring you to that forest today. However, when you enter this forest today, you once again notice something that's not quite right. You notice something different. And what you notice is this. Go ahead and open your eyes. You see this forest of dead trees. They're all brown, and the bark is falling off. And there's no leaves on them, and it's summertime. What's happening with these trees? What's killing these trees? Well, this particular stand of trees are ash trees. And the creature that's killing these trees, again, is very, very tiny. We're talking something about the size of a grain of rice. Very small. The creature that is doing this is an insect, an invasive insect. It's called an emerald ash borer. And what it does, it gets into the bark of the tree, and it starts eating away that layer between the bark and the tree itself. In fact, when you peel back the bark from one of these trees, you're going to see this crazy zigzag pattern going all over the place of tunnels and bore marks that this insect has been eating away, in effect killing the tree. Now, the primary mode how these things get spread around is through firewood. I'm going to batch of firewood right here. So as an example, say you're from Michigan. And in Michigan, this is a big problem right now. You have one of these dead trees in your yard. You cut it down, you chop it up for firewood. Then you say to yourself, you know what? I want to go on a camping trip out west. We're going to go to Wyoming. And I'm going to take this firewood with me because I don't feel like buying firewood along the way. Go out to Wyoming, you camp. You might burn most of that wood up, but you leave some of it behind. Not knowing that that firewood was infested with these ash borers. In turn, these ash borers go out of that firewood, and if you happen to be in a forest that has ash trees in Wyoming, those insects are going to go from that firewood into those ash trees and destroy those ash trees. Again, something really small. See how this penny here? Really tiny, affecting a much larger picture. And the thing I want you guys to take away today from this is just to be mindful of these things when you're out recreating here at Chatfield State Park. Be mindful of how small things can cause such huge devastation. So when you're done recreating today, if you're out hiking, go ahead and check your clothes. See if you have any pod seeds sticking to your pants or to your socks or to your silverback. You know, remove those pod seeds and dispose of them in a proper way. Either throw them in the trash or put them in a place where they're not going to get out into the wilds, into the fields, and into the forest. Same goes with fishing gear or boating gear. Make sure it's clean, drained, and dry. That way you're not going to spread any aquatic type of nuisance species. Just that small mindfulness. You know, doing a small activity to help preserve something of a much larger picture. Also, what I'd like you folks to do today, when you have a chance, is to go to a website, and it's the 100thmeridian.org. This is an organization where you can go in and get a certificate showing that you've taken this little test and you've educated yourself on invasive species. Once you've done that, I would love for you guys to go ahead and email that to me or email that directly to Colorado State Parks. And that will show us that you actually took the time to educate yourself a little more on these invasive species. And with that said, I thank you for your time, and please go out and enjoy your Colorado State Parks. Thank you.
part of the format for the certified guide course, there are a certain number of criteria you have to hit. So there was the Maslow introduction, you know, making sure people know where the restrooms, how long are you going to be out on the trail, addressing those kind of things. At some point, you have to demonstrate that you can measure success from your program or measure the impact of your program. So that was kind of his approach to, you know, earning a certificate online. And it was very much, but again, thinking about the programs you'll be doing, are there some principles you could incorporate from what he did that was different? And again, it can compare to what he started off with, was zebra mussels are 4 to 6 millimeters long, and here are the list of things that happen. What are some ways he did to engage you, to make it more entertaining?
Close your eyes and imagine.
What's the emotional impact? Your eyes are closed, you're picturing a forest, you love to go hiking, and you open your eyes and the forest is dead. What does that impact to you?
A visceral response.
Yeah. Whoa, I need to learn a little bit more about this. What else?
How you compared it to a penny, so you can actually see the size.
Yeah, pistachio seeds, grains of rice, cracked black pepper. So things that you can relate to understand the size of the
He also told you how to, maybe you come across these things, what do you do, you know, so you don't put that in the spread. So he gave you, you know, a solution, right, a solution to this problem.
You demonstrate anything?
About how the seeds stuck to them.
Yeah, and there's some humor in there as well. A little bit of the interactive component. Maybe you could have made it more interactive, but we have a 10-minute time frame. So, and then the other thing, was there a message that tied the whole presentation together? You talked about 3 different invasive species that are very different habitats. How do you tie those together?
Small equals big impact.
And that even tied into his conclusion that you just need to do something small and it has to be impact.
I like the word mindful.
Yeah.
That was my favorite word, mindful.
So again, as you're thinking through your programs, how can you just do a quick demonstration, a quick relevancy, tie that theme through, make sure that you know the theme of the program and you carry it through each of the stations that you visit. Other questions? What's that?
I know him.
Yeah. And one other, I mentioned last time that I would share briefly. We'll watch the entire presentation, but I think she uses a pretty nice tool. So that having that CD case for us sitting up there as well.
Oh, really?
Somebody fed the bird feeders this morning. So many blue jays, ravens, flickers.
I don't think it actually did this morning.
No, I saw a man and a woman out there this morning put in suet with the flickers eating right now. A man in a blue coat and like an Asian lady with dark hair. All that strawberries. Yeah, totally. It's a long story about a waving death watches.
So this was probably close to 10 years ago now. Vera is a professional interpreter with the National Park Service. She does campfire programs and guided walks up on Mount Evans, at least the last time I heard about her, that's what she was doing. She put together a presentation on bass, and like I said, won't necessarily have you sit through the whole thing, but she employs a couple of quick and easy, how to make interpretation enjoyable components that you might be able to work into one of your programs.
My name is Vera Walters. On behalf of the United States Forest Service, I'd like to welcome you here to Mount Evans. If you've just arrived, there are restrooms out the door here to your left. You can take advantage of those facilities. Here at the Doshako Nature Center, we give a 10-minute talk every day on a different animal found here on the Mount Everest complex. And today I've chosen one of my favorites, and I brought some items here that have something in common that I can share with you, this very special creature. Can you guess? Think about that. Well, this creature actually is not going to speak here on Mount Evans today, but if you come back tonight, you might have a good chance of seeing it, because this is part of the night shift. You know, it really is very beautiful here on Mount Evans at night, and the gate is open 24/7, so you're welcome to come back.
Taken from a video too.
One is complete silence, and the other is complete darkness. Now you can see the lights dim.